got a clicker? Thank you, Vince. Hi, guys. So as Aileen said, my name's Chris Clark. I'm actually Group Product Manager of Enterprise at Atlassian, which basically means, in a nutshell, if we can get my presentation going. 1 second, please. Okay. Yeah, where'd you put it? So why is she setting it up? So Group Product Manager is an interesting role at Atlassian. So basically, I carry the torch for all of our customers that have more than 1,000 employees across product. So you'll over Summit, you'll hear a lot from the product family guys, the guys that are sort of, within each product line. And so at the end of the day, basically, I make sure that all of our products actually work at scale. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you guys an update on what actually is a pretty new initiative, new in the way of probably a year and a half at Atlassian, which is, really a focus not only on enterprise products and services, but just, in general, making sure that our enterprise customers can get to the next step on the road and journey to standardization. So my presentation is in 5 parts. I'll start by talking a little bit about Atlassian as a company in the enterprise, some stats, some things that should give you comfort that we're actually starting to kill it in the enterprise. We're very much an enterprise company. I'll talk about our enterprise philosophy, those things that make us different than your typical enterprise company. Then I'll talk about the enterprise challenge, which is the things that we've learned by working with actually over 5,000 enterprise customers over a decade that are very specific to the enterprise and how we can help solve them. I'll do a little bit of a year in scale, which is a quick run through some of the updates and milestones that we've hit in the last year, and then I'll end with our enterprise investment areas going forward. If you take all those product line matters and you sort of wrap them up into what an enterprise cares about, it's kind of a thematic way of saying, where we're actually investing next. Okay, so let's start with the update on Atlassian as a company. So it was just 5 years ago that Atlassian was less than 300 employees. Mostly in Australia, and mostly concentrated on making software teams successful in software development. And as a longtime competitor of Atlassian, I can tell you that the prevailing sort of attitude among competitors and customers and analysts at the time was that Atlassian was never going to amount to anything in the enterprise. The price points were too low. The lack of a sales team was such that even if you wanted to, you couldn't even contact. And so what's interesting about it is how wrong we all were. At the end of the day, the bottoms-up approach that Atlassian has taken is not only fit for the enterprise, it's taking the enterprise by storm. And so in just 5 short years, we've blossomed to 6 offices worldwide and over 1,200 Atlassians from that 300 number. Which, by the way, incidentally, means that we're now an enterprise by our own definition, which is something I get a lot of mileage out of internally. Another big milestone that we hit just a few weeks back, which is actually pretty amazing, especially an enterprise software company, is that we hit 50,000 paying active customers that have 10 users or more. 5,000 of which are actually enterprises by that definition. 75 of those are actually Fortune 100s. And so, I find it amazing. I'm just, there was a lot of examples I could have used from a customer perspective, but I picked a couple. Where I think, it's just amazing what people are doing with Atlassian software. This is an example of, helping people hear for the first time, all the way to, changing the automotive industry as we know it. All running basically on Atlassian software. The quotes have been really great too. The pundits and the analysts have a lot of great things to say, particularly the enterprise guys. Forrester has called us out for being very customer driven, which I think is really important to the DNA of Atlassian. I really like the Forbes comment, which basically says that, compared to other enterprise software, our software sells itself, which I think is a testament to, the user experience-driven nature of the company. And then lastly, really hard critics, even TechCrunch thinks that we've hit our stride. Another thing which I'm really happy about, and Atlassian, is very proud of, is that for the 3rd time in a row, we've actually been classified in the leaders quadrant of what's called the ADLM Magic Quadrant. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it's kind of their new term for the old cranky term known as ALM. But for Atlassian is basically in league with companies 10, if not hundreds of times our size, which is a real testament to our model. And without playing the game, frankly, that these other guys play, kowtowing to the analyst. It's just by virtue of the force that Atlassian has been in enterprises, and the analysts tend to hear constant sort of questions about, well, what about these guys? What about these guys? And so they had to put us here because we're just such a force in the industry. So let's talk about our enterprise philosophy. What is it that makes Atlassian so different, in my opinion, so much better than your average enterprise company? Well, first is that we embrace modern development trends, I think, better than most. And a lot of it actually that comes back to the fact that we put a lot of our investment in R&D. Like, we reduce the cost of sale by removing some of the impediments and process on the front end. And as a consequence, we can actually be really good about embracing the trends that actually come. And so here are some examples of the trends that are important to us. So it's no secret by now that Agile and Lean has taken the world by storm. It started very much as a development phenomenon that is just like a whirlwind, sucked everybody else in. And so, we were pretty significant to the movement. In fact, a recent survey tells us that we are, in fact, the combination of Jira and Jira Agile, and soon Jira Software once everybody starts implementing it. We are the biggest, most popular Agile planning tool on the planet today. But we're not done yet. Enterprise is about scaling this as well. And so we're actually talking, if you get a chance to hear from Martin Suntinger and his group on the Jira for Portfolio side, you'll find that we have big plans to actually scale Agile across the organization. And then the other thing we're doing here is we're actually expanding Agile beyond just the confines of software development into the other business units, who are now all being sort of sucked into this whirlwind that I talk about. The other thing that enterprise has got to be about is collaboration. As the Agile whirlwind shortens these cycle times and gets everybody working so tightly together, the need to communicate at a high rate is actually never been more important. And at the end of the day, I think Atlassian above all is a collaboration company. Enterprise is also about user experience. It used to be that old clunky enterprise software was kind of the norm, but it's gotten to the point, I think, largely propelled by the devices that we carry around in our pockets, that's no longer okay. The tolerance for that old crappy UI is at an all-time low. And so a lot of the reason I think Atlassian is as successful as they are is because we put such a focus on user experience as a company. We will continue to do that. In fact, there's a lot coming that will even be improved upon what we have today, which largely is about reducing the complexity. It's about multiple devices. As you get further and further up in the organization, up and out of the software development team, the need to actually run on everything from a phone to even a watch, becomes important. And so for us, making sure that we're supporting the devices of today is super important for enterprise. It's also about tools ecosystem. It's one thing to be talking about an individual team, who maybe, have all Atlassian gear, but when you get to the enterprise, you run into ever-changing dynamic tool chains that actually contain all kinds of tools, of which Atlassian is a small but important part. And we're humble enough at Atlassian to know that we need to fit within this. And so, at the end of the day, it's really important for us to constantly be thinking about what do we integrate with, and just the comings and goings of software on the team level. And last but not least, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, it's about cloud. Whether or not you're talking about AWS or whether you're talking about SaaS, the desire to actually, not have to do all the heavy lifting of maintenance and administration and upgrading, all that kind of stuff is quickly, in fact, I think there might even be an avalanche coming, moving us towards cloud in the industry. And one of the things that I'm doing is I'm having a lot of conversations, probably the most interesting conversations in the last decade, about the readiness of enterprises to adopt cloud. So moving on, what else is enterprise about? It's about maximizing user satisfaction. Most enterprise companies, are actually happy to just wine and dine a couple of buyers and decision makers and then say, okay, we're good. We got the 3-year contract. That's not the way it works at Atlassian. Atlassian, we actually care deeply about the end users. And we actually instrument our software in the cloud and on premises with the ability to actually harvest information that tells us whether those users are actually happy. And essentially, our philosophy is that happy users is going to make everybody happy, including those that have to administer the service. Atlassian Enterprise is about incremental product adoption. So a lot of enterprise companies will try to sell you a monolithic end-to-end rip and replace solution that forces you to throw away tools that actually were kind of working for you in the name of some bigger thing. And so the beauty of Atlassian is that you can adopt our software at your own pace. If you get one, that's great. If you get more and more, that's great too. And that's really important because it's important to us that you can choose your battles as you actually are adopting us. But at the same time, and I think this is important too, it's also about making products that work together. So as you actually are picking up these things piece by piece, wherever you decide to get to, the fact that they're all laced together and they do kind of magical synergistic things, when they're sitting side by side is super important. So the fact that you can have the piecemeal and it all works together, but by the way, both inside and outside of our stack is something that's really important to the modern enterprise. Next up, next generation customer service. So we get dinged sometimes, particularly in the enterprise and by analysts, because people feel like we have kind of a light process on the front. We actually prefer automation. We like not to haggle. I call it a no hassle, no haggle front end. But at the end of the day, we're actually finding that people are starting to prefer this. Certainly there's some work to do to actually fill in some of the things that we can actually do to make things easier for you. But we believe at Atlassian that the world is headed towards no fuss, no muss transactions. But at the same time, on the back end, to have a caring and complete customer service. So together, the light on the front, but then what you need on the back, I think, is a model that's increasingly working for us. And if you believe our numbers, it's working for a lot of our customers too. So on premises and in the cloud, I talked a little bit about it before, but at Atlassian, we actually firmly believe that it's not a question of if people are going to move to the cloud, but it's a question of when. It's one of these things that I think we have to do some soul searching about what level of compliance, what level of security, what level of availability and performance, and all the things that are necessary. But we're in open dialogue right now, and actually I would encourage any of you guys to come find me later if you're interested in being part of a cloud readiness interview that I call it. But we're very serious about being the world-class vendor for cloud-based, whatever you want to call it. Okay, and then last but not least, from a philosophy perspective, a lot of enterprise software, you start out and things look pretty smooth, right? You're using it, at a very, sort of, a couple of teams here and there. But then what ends up happening for a lot of people, and yes, I did work a little bit on this animation, is you run into this problem with a lot of software where you run into, frankly, you hit the shoals. Degrading performance, availability, the architecture gets funny, et cetera. And so, I'm not going to say that it's always been perfect with Atlassian software by any means, but just understand that our mission is to make sure that this doesn't happen to you, that as you scale, and actually as you're moving up the journey towards standardization, that you can get to the mountaintop, unscathed. And so at the end of the day, that's how I corral, a lot of what we do on the enterprise side, is just to make sure that that's smooth as butter. Okay, so let's change gears a little bit, the enterprise challenge. So these are, so we've worked with 5,000 customers over a decade, and so we've seen some patterns about, the challenges inside the enterprise. So I want to hit you with a couple of them and see if they resonate. So the first is the people side of the equation. What we tend to find in the enterprise is that there's lots and lots of teams. There are teams all over the planet. There are different cultures, different time zones, different processes, different paces. And it's real tempting these days to actually let these teams avail themselves of their differences and get what we call autonomy, actually the ability to do effectively what they want. And you typically find that you get better innovation and faster time to market when you do this, but it comes at a price. That price is that when you're in an enterprise and you're trying to get all the trains to come into the station at the same time, and you're doing systems of systems, you're doing systems of engagement, systems of record, and they're all sort of working together, is that it's really difficult to provide the autonomy to the individual teams while also sort of marching towards the common cause. And so visibility is often the thing that you lose track of, the more autonomy that you give people. And so you end up with this sort of tension, this choice And I see it again and again when I talk to customers where we don't want to lose our autonomy, but we need more visibility. We're tempted to put oppressive standards-based workflows in place and let them pick from one or two, but we know that they're going to complain and morale is going to go down and we want to force this tool and all that kind of stuff. And so at the end of the day, the mission of Atlassian is to make sure that you do not have to make that choice. It's to give you the ability to have the autonomy and give the guys the level of flexibility they need, while at the same time maintaining the minimum viable visibility necessary to actually get all the trains to come into the station at the same time. So how do we do that? The autonomy comes through a bunch of different avenues. I mean, one is supporting the way teams work. We're very flexible. In fact, sometimes we're accused of being over-flexible. But we do believe that we're instrumenting things that allow you to control that and find the balance between that autonomy and visibility. We can fit into your dynamic tool chain, right? So what ends up happening many times is the differences between dev teams are what they're developing and what tools they're using. So we're trying to always make sure that we can remain compatible with the other tools in the chain. And then lastly, if we don't build the functionality, the odds are that somebody else does. And so you can end up with something that's actually quite different than what you get out of the box simply by addending the marketplace stuff. On the visibility side, some of that magic I talk about how you can snap together the various pieces, if you pick up more and more of our tools, basically it relates to traceability. It's the ability to follow the flows, from any sort of entry point all the way through to the others, right? So what was behind that commit, or what did we do as a consequence of that work item? And that traceability, it manifests in many, many different ways. Now, the other thing is we're also working to improve this. Jira for Portfolio is an example of where we're actually ratcheting up that visibility. But from a mission perspective, it's very much about allowing you guys to have your cake and eat it too. So next up, this is another big enterprise challenge, is at the end of the day, and I keep saying that, I'll stop saying that, enterprise software requires collaboration at multiple levels. You have in-team collaboration, you have a cross-team collaboration, and you have cross-the-enterprise collaboration. And we're working to make it work at all three of these levels. So, most people in the room by now know our suite, so I'm not going to go into great detail about all the tools. But, we believe that we have a pretty good, rounded solution now for a software team. Running Confluence, often, on the definition and planning, and then leave behind on the documentation all the way through using Jira software and Bitbucket and the dev tools. The advent of Jira Service Desk in recent times to help you round out the services part, and then having HipChat sort of all along the way, allowing people to communicate in real time. So this is probably where we get most of our success these days. But we're also thinking hard about now what it means to actually coordinate across teams. So our products do a pretty good job of this. The project structure allows you to sort of reach into other projects, and there's a level of project collaboration that can occur. But an example of where we're pushing the envelope on this again is Portfolio for Jira. It's that single pane of glass across multiple projects. And this is something that you're going to see more and more from us, is that ability to sort of transcend the individual team and become team of teams over time. The other thing that's kind of interesting is, most of the customers that we talk to, we find are actually using our software for the damnedest things, which is always probably the most fun you can have as a vendor, is like, you're using it for what exactly? And a lot of our strategy in recent times has been to actually codify that, to make it possible, through decomplexing, as an example, Jira Core, decomplexifying and make it, really, really compelling to use our software, even if you're well outside of software dev. And then last challenge that we see a lot, this is a common pattern, is the way that people adopt Atlassian software. I mean, the way it often goes is you'll have an individual or a couple of individuals who will find out about it, hear about it from a friend. Over the water cooler, they'll tell more and more and more, and before you know it, there's Atlassian all over your organization. I mean, this is a very common pattern. And then a lot of people come to us and they'll say, well, so help. We don't know what to do about this. I've got 35 instances of Jira. Now what? And so a lot of the data center stuff actually came out of this need, just so you guys know. The idea behind it, and I'm not going to pitch the product to you here, but effectively what we've done is we've made for a big scaling answer to this, which is a multinodal approach to Jira Software, Confluence, and Bitbucket Server for high availability, performance at scale, instant scalability, and disaster recovery. So if you are getting to that point now where you're like, okay, what's the next step? How do I consolidate? How can you guys help me do that? You take a look at data center. But even if you're not at that point yet, know that it's out there, because just knowing that when you do get there one day, that you have the ability to scale, should hopefully make you more comfortable about continuing on the journey. And just so you know, what we've seen from a throughput, this is just a real quick performance thing. This is Jira events per second when you add multiple nodes to the picture. So you can see that you can get a pretty significant boost in throughput. And one of the things I also really like about it is in the load balancing scheme, if you have particular types of transactions that you want to stay off of your, say, main instance, you can do that, like for CI or for something else. And then, if you guys don't know, enterprise services are there as well. We have Premier Support, which is, the next level of support. We have technical account management for guys that can advise you day to day on what to do strategically with your installations. And then, as you probably well know, we have a great ecosystem of expert partners, all regional, and they know, particular verticals, et cetera. Okay, so let me change to 2015, the year in scale. What this is this was just me, picking various things that I thought were interesting from an enterprise perspective that we've done in the last year, just to give you guys an idea for the release streams and things that we've done. If you don't already know, I'm going to move through it pretty quickly. In January, we actually released HipChat Server due to popular demand. A lot of our enterprise customers were okay with the cloud, but at the end of the day, they preferred to have it on server, and so we did that. Then in February, we released Confluence 5.7. This had actually some pretty interesting data center features in it, not the least of which was a monitoring console for the clustering. We also made it possible to integrate Confluence and HipChat really well, which I think is a very enterprise use case, by the way, integrating the tools together. Then in March, we took the beta off of Stash Data Center, it was known at the time, and actually went GA. And this has actually been pretty significantly the most successful of our data center SKUs, for those who don't know, is the Stash Data Center SKU. And I'll talk more about Stash here in a bit. Big release for us. In March, we actually released Jira 6.4, which, based on our internal testing, we thought we'd get about a 30% performance boost. And actually, we've found, as I've talked to customers, that some people are actually getting even more than that. So just a show of hands, how many guys out in the audience have 6.4 at this point? Okay, that's a lot. And how many of you guys have actually seen tangible benefits on the performance end? Okay, that's great. So by the way, 6.4 was also when we debuted disaster recovery for Jira Data Center, just so you guys know. I do want to talk a little bit about the on-premises analytics there. So one thing we did is we made it possible for you guys to actually harvest information on premises and send it to us from an analytics perspective. And so I just want to put a little bit of a plug in there. If you can turn that on, it really helps us, because we get information about the availability and sort of the profile from a performance perspective of your Jira servers, and we really love that information. It helps us basically figure out, in that way that we do, whether or not what we do is actually fixing the problem. Then in April, Stash 3.8 was released. This is actually a big release for AWS and Stash at the time. We also did what I think is a pretty cool health monitoring thing using JMX. Moving on to June, Confluence 5.8 came out. This was something that was actually really good for the enterprise for a few reasons. We did some stuff on the data center front, but we also added some features that would help content at scale, which is something that I think is really important for Confluence. Moving on to June, so Stash 3.10 came out. So this is something that's close to my heart. Having been in the version control business for a while, so we actually made it possible to actually instrument some rules around branching when it comes to Stash that you should look into. That actually makes it possible to require a little bit more rigor when it comes to checking things in and doing pull requests, that kind of thing. We also improved the HipChat integration. Data center for 500 users. This is something I'm pretty happy about. So based on popular demand, data center we actually introduced a new tier, a 500 user tier, that now makes it possible for people who don't have 1,000 users to actually play too. And actually, I'm kind of interested to hear, from you guys as well, whether or not we got that right. Do you find that the features of data center are such that they're not necessarily about a massive number of users, but actually the features you get? So we may not be done actually making changes there. Next up, Stash is now Bitbucket. So this will be probably the last presentation I ever give with the word Stash. So as of September 22nd, for those of you who don't know, we actually unified all of our Git products under a unified name known as Bitbucket. So what used to be known as Stash Server is now Bitbucket Server, and Stash Data Center is now Bitbucket Data Center. Okay? So huge release for us, also very enterprise friendly, I would say, and enterprise driven, is that in October we actually released Jira 7. I think most people in the room have heard this now, but it amounted to effectively decomplexifying the user experiences for specific use cases. We like to say purpose-built. And what that effectively allows us to do is iterate faster on each of those products and make sure that we're actually maintaining a focus on the use cases and the personas for each one of those products. So it should result in a faster iteration time, a more focused feature set, and it actually on our side, it unencumbers what it means to actually release Jira. Along with it, and this was a lot of people were waiting for this one, is we actually also released Jira Service Desk 3.0, which along with it made Service Desk finally compatible with Data Center. So for those of you who are here, over a year ago, and you heard from us, hey, we've got Data Center and we've got Service Desk, and we sort of forced you to choose there for a while, but now you don't have to anymore. There is one more release that I think is worth noting. It's not out yet, and I have I can't commit to its date, as you guys have seen in many of our presentations. But do know that it actually rounds out the disaster recovery story, in this case for Confluence Data Center. And for those who know, I'm not going to explain it here, but we finally get rid of this multicast thing that we've been doing, which I see a lot of nods. People know what that is. Now, one thing that's pretty late-breaking news about this as well, it didn't make the deadline for the slides here, is that we're seeing potentially a 25% increase in performance as well, the server and data center on this as well. So, that rounds out, a big focus that we've had on performance. Okay. All right. So real quickly, and then I'll wrap it up here. I'm going to talk just quickly about our enterprise investment areas, which, by the way, happen to be the same as the big themes. So let's talk a little bit about what we're doing on a per product basis, for these themes. So on the agile and lean side, there's a lot of work going on in Jira Software. As I mentioned, now that it's a separate product, we can iterate faster and do things that are more focused on software, a lot of which is agile. We actually have a portfolio for Jira work going on as well, which will make it possible to scale agile. On the Bitbucket side, and that also includes dev tools, we continue to enhance Bamboo. Bamboo is actually taking off these days on the CI side and the continuous delivery side. So you're going to see some news there. And Service Desk is starting to round out the rest of the agile whirlwind as we start pulling in the other guys like IT, et cetera. And then HipChat is also rallying in agile and lean as well, and we're invested in that, largely in the way that we string together, multiple stakeholders as they get together in things like chat ops, and getting things done in the pit together. On the collaboration front, there's a lot going on, of course, in Confluence. If you haven't heard yet, there's a lab where you can participate as we're talking about collaborative editing, sort of a la Google Docs, which will make it easier to collaborate, quickly. You're going to hear that in another session. HipChat is also, getting continuous work to actually make it better and easier. On the user experience, this rings all the bells. This is something that you're going to see a lot of news from us. One of the biggest NPS feedback things that we get is about the complexity of our software. And so we are now trying to decomplexify. And a lot of these tactics that you see, like product separation, et cetera, are for improving that. On the by the way, that also includes performance. One of the big things we're doing actually in the Bitbucket area there is we're adding mirroring, which you probably heard a little bit about in the keynote, I think. But long story short is we're making it possible to rack read-only instances of Bitbucket Server and Bitbucket Data Center in region, so that it's actually possible to get better performance in region. Multiple devices, big news on the Confluence front, big news on the Jira Software front, and the HipChat front. We're always making our clients better. We're moving to more native, supportive of newer use cases. On the tools ecosystem front, there's a huge amount of work going on right now to embrace the cloud style of API connection, this Atlassian Connect thing that you may have heard of, which, by the way, will both make our cloud more bulletproof and better from an add-on perspective, but also will make your lives better in that we're sort of buttoning up and making a more sort of contained sort of add-on approach, which means that we have less invasive, less at the end of the day problematic add-ons. And then last but not least is there's lots and lots of work going on the cloud front. We aim to be the most secure, most performant, most available, most compliant cloud vendor out there. And as I said earlier, I really look forward to talking to you guys about what is necessary in order to do that. So you want to learn more about this? We actually have an enterprise table, which is just around the corner next to the product hub. Come visit us. I'll be there. If I'm not there, just ask for me and somebody will chase me down. You can visit our enterprise page, which is great, out there on what we call WAC, www.atlassian.com. And if you want, anytime you can contact our enterprise team. There's what we call enterprise advocates that are here today and over the course of this week, so please drop by. And lastly, I want to thank you guys for being on the journey with us. It is our aim to make sure that you guys can scale all the way to the point that you need to. And we're humble thanks that you guys are sticking with us. So thank you very much.